My name is Megan Foster, I'm 29 years old, and I work as an event coordinator in Denver, Colorado. For 8 months, I planned my stepmother's wedding down to the last candle wick, the venue, the photographer, the seating chart, the flowers, the string quartet, every single detail, all for free, because that's what family does. On the morning of the wedding, I found out I didn't have a seat at the family table. 2 hours before the ceremony started, I made one phone call that ended it before it ever began. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people finally find their voice and family secrets come out into the light. Grab your coffee, get comfortable, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. If stories about family, weddings, and the moment someone finally stops being invisible speak to you, hit that subscribe button, because this one starts on a Saturday morning in October, in a bridal suite that smelled like hairspray and roses. Let me back up first, though, because you need to understand how I ended up being the free wedding planner for a woman who, 3 years earlier, could barely remember my birthday. My dad, Richard, married my mom when they were both 22. They divorced when I was 11. It wasn't dramatic, not the kind of divorce you see in movies. It was quiet and sad, the kind where two people just slowly stop being able to look at each other across a kitchen table. I split my time between them for years. My mom passed away from cancer when I was 24, and after that, my dad became the only parent I had left. I clung to that relationship harder than I probably should have, if I'm being honest with you. 3 years ago, my dad met a woman named Denise at a golf tournament fundraiser. She was polished, confident, the kind of woman who always had her nails done and knew the difference between Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc without looking at the label. She had 2 adult daughters of her own from her first marriage, Brittany and Courtney, both a little younger than me, both still living at home in their late 20s, which always struck me as odd, but I never said anything. At first, Denise was warm to me. Complimentary. She'd tell my dad, in front of me, how impressive it was that I had my own event planning business, how put together I seemed, how lucky he was to have a daughter like me. I ate that up. I hadn't had a mother figure in my life for years, and some small, aching part of me wanted her approval so badly that I didn't notice, for a long time, that the compliments always came with a small hook attached. "You're so good at this stuff," she said to me one night at dinner, about 6 months after she and my dad started dating. "You should really do our engagement party when the time comes. It would mean so much to your father." I laughed it off then. I didn't think much of it. But the time came faster than I expected. My dad proposed on a trip to Napa Valley the following spring, and within a week, Denise was calling me with color palettes and Pinterest boards. I want to be clear about something, because it matters for what happens later in this story. Nobody sat me down and asked, "Megan, would you be willing to plan this wedding for us as a gift, and here's what we'd offer you in return?" That conversation never happened. What happened instead was a slow, steady current of expectation. Denise would mention a venue she loved, and somehow by the next week I had already toured it and gotten a quote. She'd mention loving a particular photographer's Instagram, and somehow I was the one emailing him about availability and negotiating his rate down by $600 because that's literally my job, and I'm good at it. My dad, for his part, would call me and say things like, "You have no idea how much this takes off my plate, Meg. Denise says you're a lifesaver." And I would feel that warm, stupid glow you feel when the person you love the most tells you that you matter. I think a lot of us know that feeling. It's dangerous, because it makes you say yes to things you never actually agreed to. Over 8 months, I built that wedding from nothing. I found the venue, a restored barn outside of Boulder with exposed beams and string lights, and I negotiated a full 10% off the rental fee because I'd worked with the owner before. I built the entire seating chart myself, a spreadsheet with color-coded tabs, because that's simply how my brain works. I coordinated with the florist on an arrangement of white ranunculus and eucalyptus that Denise had seen in a magazine and desperately wanted. I stayed up past midnight 3 separate times solving problems that weren't mine to solve, a caterer who dropped out 6 weeks before the date, a DJ who double-booked himself, a bridesmaid dress order that came back in the wrong color. I did all of it while running my own business. I did all of it without being paid a single dollar. And when people would ask me, at industry events or with friends, "Wait, aren't you basically running this wedding for free?" I would smile and say something like, "She's my family. This is what you do for family." Here's the thing about that sentence, though. I said it a lot. I said it so many times that I started to believe it meant something to the people I was saying it about. It didn't occur to me, not once in 8 months, that the sentence only ran in one direction. The morning of the wedding, I woke up at 5:30. I'd been up until nearly 2 the night before finalizing the run-of-show document, a minute-by-minute schedule I'd built and sent to every vendor, every member of the wedding party, and my dad. I drove out to the venue before sunrise to make sure the barn doors were unlocked for the florist's delivery. I directed the tent crew on where to set up the cocktail hour tables. I steamed the runners myself when they arrived wrinkled from the rental company. By 9 in the morning, I had already put in what felt like a full workday, and the ceremony wasn't until 2 in the afternoon. Around 11, I finally made my way up to the bridal suite, a converted farmhouse room upstairs from the barn, to check on Denise and make sure hair and makeup were running on schedule. I remember climbing those old wooden stairs with my clipboard in hand, feeling something close to pride. Everything had gone right. Every vendor was where they needed to be. The weather, which had threatened rain all week, had cleared into a soft, golden October afternoon. I remember thinking, this is going to be beautiful, and some small part of it is because of me. I opened the door to the suite and the room was full of noise and mimosas and hairspray. Denise sat in the center chair getting her makeup finished, and Brittany and Courtney were already in their robes, laughing about something on someone's phone. My dad's sister, my Aunt Carol, was there too, along with 2 of Denise's close friends from her book club. I said good morning, told Denise the flowers had arrived and looked exactly like the magazine photo, and asked if she needed anything before the ceremony. She smiled at me in the mirror, the kind of smile people give a caterer, polite and a little distracted, and said, "You're a lifesaver, Meg, seriously." Then she turned to her makeup artist and asked whether her contour looked too heavy for outdoor photos. I stood there for a second, waiting for something. I don't even know what. Maybe just to be looked at, actually looked at, for 1 second, the way you look at someone who has spent 8 months of unpaid labor making your day possible. It didn't come. So I checked something off my clipboard and turned to leave. That's when I heard Courtney's voice behind me, not to me, but not exactly hiding it either, the way people talk when they've stopped considering whether you can hear them. Wait, is Megan sitting with us at the family table? I thought that was just us and Mom's side. And Denise, still looking in the mirror, still having her contour blended, said, "Oh, no, honey, I moved her to the vendor and staff table by the kitchen. She's basically working the wedding anyway, it just makes more sense. Your dad's cousins can have her old seat." I want you to notice something with me, the way I noticed it standing in that doorway. Not once did anyone say my name to me. They talked about me the way you talk about a caterer's assistant who's forgotten in the room, present but somehow furniture. My dad's cousins, people I'd met maybe twice in my life, were getting the seat at the family table that had been mine on the seating chart I built with my own hands 3 weeks earlier. I didn't say anything. I closed the door softly behind me and walked back down those old wooden stairs, and I want to tell you honestly, I don't remember deciding what I was going to do. It was more like my body already knew, and my mind was just catching up. I want you to comment below, honestly, if you've ever found out where you really stood with someone by accident, by overhearing something you weren't supposed to hear. There's something almost merciful about it. It removes all the guessing. I walked out to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and pulled out my laptop. I had 2 hours before the ceremony. My hands were steady. That surprised me, actually, because my chest didn't feel steady at all. Here's what most people don't understand about event coordination, and it's the thing that made the next 90 minutes possible. Every single vendor at that wedding, the caterer, the florist, the DJ, the string quartet, the venue coordinator, the rental company delivering the tables and chairs, every one of them was in contact with me. Not with Denise. Not with my dad. Me. My phone number was on every contract. My email was the point of contact on every invoice. I hadn't just planned the wedding. I was, functionally, the only person who could actually make it run. I want to be very clear about something, because it matters. I did not cancel a single vendor. I did not call the caterer and tell them not to show up. I did not call the florist and ask for a refund. Everything that had already been paid for, everything that had already been delivered, stayed exactly as it was. I'm not a petty person, and honestly, ruining someone's flowers wouldn't have fixed anything that was actually broken. What I did was much simpler, and much quieter. I opened my laptop and I sent one email, CCING my dad, to every vendor on the list. It said, in part, that as of that morning, I was withdrawing as the day of coordinator and point of contact for the event, effective immediately, and that all further communication and on-site logistics questions should be directed to the client, meaning Denise and my father, at the phone numbers listed on their original contracts. Then I called the venue coordinator, a woman named Patricia who I'd worked with a dozen times before, and told her the same thing in person. She asked me, very kindly, if everything was okay. I told her I was fine, that this was a personal matter, and that I trusted her to handle the day beautifully, because I did. Patricia was excellent at her job. She didn't need me standing over her shoulder. She just needed someone to answer the questions I'd been answering all morning. Where does the cake table go? Is the DJ set up in the right spot? Has anyone confirmed the officiant's arrival time? Then I did the last thing. I texted my dad. Not Denise. My dad. I wrote, I'm heading out. I found out I'm not sitting with family today, so I don't think it makes sense for me to keep running the show either. Everything is paid for and the vendors are wonderful, they don't need me. I hope it's a beautiful day. I hit send, closed my laptop, and drove home. 2 hours before a wedding I had spent 8 months building. I want to pause here and tell you honestly, comment below if you think I overreacted, because I've heard both sides of that argument plenty of times since. But I want you to sit with the actual math of it before you decide. 8 months. No pay. A seating chart I built myself, at a table I got moved off of, next to a kitchen, so that people I barely knew could sit in my place. I didn't burn the wedding down. I simply stopped being the invisible structure holding it up, and let the people who built that structure without ever thanking me find out what it feels like to hold it themselves for one afternoon. My phone started ringing about 40 minutes after I sent that text. I was already home, sitting on my couch still in my sundress, my makeup half done for a ceremony I was no longer attending. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail, 4 times in a row, then let it sit. Here's what I found out later, piecing it together from my dad, from Aunt Carol, and eventually, weeks later, from Patricia herself, who I still work with regularly and who told me the whole thing with a kind of gentle amusement I appreciated more than she probably knew. The DJ, who I'd been the sole point of contact with for 6 months, had never actually spoken to Denise or my dad directly and didn't have their current cell numbers, only mine, which by contract he was now instructed not to use. He showed up, set up his equipment, and then sat there for 20 minutes not knowing when the ceremony music was supposed to start, because that timeline lived in the run-of-show document I'd built, which nobody else had ever bothered to open. The florist had a question about where exactly the arch arrangement should go, an easy fix normally, except the person who would have answered that in 10 seconds was me, and instead Patricia had to physically walk into the bridal suite and interrupt Denise mid-makeup to ask her directly, which visibly rattled her 20 minutes before she needed to walk down an aisle looking serene. The caterer needed a final headcount confirmation for 2 late RSVPs, a 2-minute email I would have handled without anyone noticing. Instead, my dad had to step out of getting dressed in his suit to deal with it on the phone, sweating slightly, according to Aunt Carol, in a barn that didn't have air conditioning. And the seating chart. My beautiful, color-coded seating chart, the one I built myself, the one Denise had rearranged that morning without telling me, nobody could find the updated version. The version I'd built lived in my laptop, and the little sticky note change Denise had scribbled to the printed copy in the suite about swapping my seat for my dad's cousins hadn't made it back to Patricia, who was working off my original file. Which meant, when the guests started arriving, there were 2 extra name cards missing and 1 confused table by the kitchen with a place setting for a coordinator who wasn't there. None of this ruined the wedding. I want to be fair about that. The ceremony still happened. The flowers were still beautiful. My dad and Denise are still married, as far as I know. But for about 90 minutes that afternoon, in front of 120 guests, the 2 people who spent 8 months treating my labor as invisible got a very public, very small taste of exactly how much invisible labor I had been carrying. My dad called me that night, around 9. His voice was tired in a way I hadn't heard before, not angry exactly, more like a man who'd had a mirror held up to him for the first time in a while. He asked me what happened, and I told him the truth, calmly, the same way I'd say it to you right now. I told him about the family table, about Courtney's question, about Denise's answer about the kitchen. I told him I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because I finally understood, in that doorway, exactly what I was to that family, and I decided I didn't want to spend one more minute pretending otherwise. He was quiet for a long time on the phone. Then he said, "I didn't know about the table thing. I swear to you, Meg, I didn't know." And I believed him, actually, because my dad has never been a cruel man, just a passive one, the kind of man who lets other people make the hard decisions and then acts surprised when the decisions turn out badly. I told him that was almost worse, in a way. Not knowing where your own daughter was supposed to sit at your wedding. Denise never called me. Not that night, not the next week. About a month later I got a text from her that said, "I think there was a misunderstanding about the seating. I hope we can move past it," which is, if you've ever received a message like that, not actually an apology at all. It's a request for you to do the emotional labor of forgetting something that was never named. I haven't answered it yet. I'm not sure I will. Here's what I know for certain, sitting here telling you this story. I spent 8 months building something beautiful for people who, when it came down to an actual seat at an actual table, decided I belonged by the kitchen. And for 2 hours on an October morning, I stopped being the quiet structure nobody thanked, and I let them feel, just for an afternoon, what it's like to stand in a room without me holding it up. I still talk to my dad. We're working on it, slowly, the way you rebuild something that was never really finished being built in the first place. I have not been invited to a single family event since. I've made peace, mostly, with the idea that I might not be. But I kept every invoice. I kept every email. I kept the run-of-show document, 90 pages of my own unpaid labor, sitting quietly on a hard drive, in case anyone in that family ever tries to tell a different version of this story than the one that actually happened. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever been the invisible one holding everything together while somebody else got the seat, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what finally made you stop being invisible in your own family. And if stories like this speak to you, make sure you hit subscribe, because I've got a lot more of these, and I have a feeling some of you have a story sitting in you too. I'll see you in the next one.